Did any of the 12 apostles of Jesus die peacefully? Or were they all killed for what they believed? For those who haven't read the Bible, the apostles were Jesus Christ's inner circle. 12 men he personally chose to follow him and later spread his message. After Jesus' crucifixion around 33 AD, they became the first leaders of the Christian church and the main witnesses to his life and resurrection. That mission made them targets of intense persecution. The original 12 apostles were Peter, Andrew, James, son of Zebedee, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, Matthew, James, son of Alphaeus, Jude, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot. After Judas betrayed Jesus and died, he was replaced by Matthias. But the Bible records the death of only one faithful apostle, James, the son of Zebedee. All other accounts of their deaths come from early church tradition and historical writings outside Scripture. So how did the rest of them die? Let's get into it. Let's start with James the Greater because his story is the only one the Bible clearly records. James was a fisherman before Jesus called him, and he ended up becoming the first of the 12 apostles to be killed for his faith. His death is mentioned directly in Acts 12:2, which already makes his story unique. Around 44 AD, things in Jerusalem were getting tense. King Herod Agrippa I wanted to stay on good terms with the religious leaders who strongly opposed Christianity. So, to keep them happy, he went after the church, and James was one of the first targets. Herod ordered James to be beheaded with a sword. There's also an old tradition that adds a powerful detail. According to Clement of Alexandria, the guard who escorted James to court was so moved by James's calm faith that he declared himself a Christian on the spot. The result was that he executed right alongside James. Now let's talk about Peter, probably the most well-known apostle of them all. Peter became a key leader in the early church, and according to long-standing tradition, his final days were spent in Rome. This was during the reign of Emperor Nero, one of the most ruthless persecutors of Christians. After the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, Nero needed someone to blame, and Christians became the perfect scapegoat. Arrests, executions, and public cruelty followed. Church tradition, including writings from the 2nd century, says Peter was sentenced to death by crucifixion. But here's the detail people remember most. Peter asked to be crucified upside down because he believed he wasn't worthy to die in the same way Jesus did. That request has come to define Peter's martyrdom, a mix of courage, humility, and deep loyalty. Interestingly, the Gospel of John hints at this long before it happened, recording Jesus telling Peter that one day he would stretch out his hands and glorify God in his death. And that's how the man who once denied Jesus ended his life. Next up is Andrew, Peter's brother, and interestingly, the first one to follow Jesus. Like Peter, Andrew was a fisherman, and after Jesus' resurrection, tradition says he traveled far and wide preaching the gospel. We're talking Scythia, Asia Minor, and Greece, places well outside Israel. Eventually, Andrew's journey ended in the Greek city of Patras, around 60 AD. According to early church tradition, he was sentenced to death by crucifixion. But instead of being nailed to the cross, Andrew was tied to it, which meant the suffering lasted much longer. And the cross itself? Tradition says it was shaped like an X. That shape later became known as the St. Andrew's Cross. Like his brother Peter, Andrew is said to have made a humble request. He didn't feel worthy to die on the same kind of cross Jesus did. Now let's talk about Philip, one of the very first apostles Jesus called. Philip is best known for two things: asking thoughtful, sometimes very human questions, and for bringing Nathanael to meet Jesus. He wasn't flashy, but he was faithful. The Bible doesn't tell us how Philip died, and to make things more confusing, early writers sometimes mixed him up with Philip the Evangelist, who was a different person. Still, most ancient traditions agree on where his story ended. Philip is believed to have been martyred in Hierapolis in modern-day Turkey, around 80 AD. Accounts vary. Some say he may have been stoned or even died naturally, but the most consistent tradition says he was crucified. The early church historian Eusebius wrote that Philip was executed on a T-shaped cross. And in a fascinating twist, archaeologists in 2011 discovered a 1st-century tomb in Hierapolis that they believe may be Philip's final resting place. Next is Bartholomew, who many believe is the same person as Nathanael from Cana. This is the man Jesus once described as someone with no deceit in him. Basically, honest to the core. After Jesus' death, tradition says Bartholomew traveled extensively, carrying the gospel across the Near East, Arabia, and eventually as far as Armenia and India. He didn't stay close to home, he went wherever the message took him. Now, Bartholomew's death is considered one of the most brutal in church history. According to the strongest traditions, he was arrested in Albanopolis, Armenia, and sentenced to be flayed alive. That means his skin was slowly cut away while he was still conscious. As horrifying as that sounds, ancient accounts say Bartholomew remained unwavering, even continuing to speak about his faith until the very end. His execution was finally completed either by beheading or crucifixion. Now let's talk about Thomas, better known to many as Doubting Thomas. But honestly, that label doesn't tell the full story. Yes, he doubted at first, but tradition remembers him as one of the boldest missionaries of all the apostles. In fact, he may have traveled farther than any of the others. Thomas is believed to have preached among the Parthians and Medes before heading all the way to the Indian subcontinent. There's even historical evidence connecting him to King Gondophares, a real Indo-Parthian ruler in northwestern India during the 1st century. Later, Thomas traveled south, helping establish Christian communities in Malabar and eventually reaching the Coromandel coast. His mission ended around 72 AD at a place now called Mylapore. According to tradition, Thomas was praying when he was attacked by those who opposed his teachings. He was killed by spears or lances, struck down where he knelt. Centuries later, his memory lived on far beyond India. A merchant named Caban is said to have carried Thomas's bones to Edessa. It turned the city into a major center of devotion in his honor. So the man who once said, "Unless I see, I won't believe," ended his life believing enough to cross continents and die for it. Now let's talk about Matthew, also known as Levi. Before following Jesus, Matthew was a tax collector. It was a job that made him wealthy but also deeply unpopular. Yet he went on to become the author of the Gospel of Matthew. After Jesus' resurrection, tradition says Matthew spent years preaching in places like Parthia and Ethiopia. There is one early source that suggests he may have died peacefully, but most early church historians strongly disagreed with that idea. According to ancient records, including Fox's Book of Martyrs, Matthew was killed around 60 AD in the Ethiopian city of Nadaba. The story goes that he was stabbed to death with a halberd while actively serving the church he had helped establish there. In religious art, Matthew is often shown with money bags. It's a reminder of the life he left behind, or with the weapon of his martyrdom. Next is James the Less, also widely known as James the Just. He wasn't one of the most outspoken apostles, but he became an incredibly important leader. He served as the first bishop of the Jerusalem church. He was highly respected even by many who didn't follow Jesus because of his strict moral life and deep commitment to Jewish law. But that influence made him a threat. Around 62 AD, religious authorities in Jerusalem decided to silence him. According to the early historian Hegesippus, James was taken to the top of the temple and told to publicly deny Jesus in front of the crowd. Instead, James did the opposite. He openly declared that Jesus was the Messiah. That's when they threw him off the temple. Amazingly, the fall didn't kill him. As he lay there injured, James reportedly began praying for the people attacking him. The crowd then started stoning him, and finally a man stepped forward and struck him on the head with a fuller's club, a heavy wooden tool used in wool making. That blow ended his life. Next is Jude, also known as Thaddeus, and no, not the Judas who betrayed Jesus. This Jude quietly carried the message far beyond familiar territory. Tradition says he traveled by sea, moving from port to port, eventually preaching in the Near East, especially Armenia and Mesopotamia. The Bible doesn't tell us how his life ended, so what we know comes from early church history, and the stories don't all agree. Some ancient sources, including the Martyrology of Jerome, say Jude was crucified in Edessa around 72 AD. But another tradition paints a much more violent picture. According to the Acts of Simon and Jude, local pagan priests became furious when Jude's preaching led to the destruction of their idols. Their response was that they hacked him to death. That brutal version of his death is why Jude is often shown in art holding a club or an axe. Simon the Zealot is often mentioned right alongside Jude, and that's because tradition says the two of them traveled and preached together. Simon lived up to his name. He carried the gospel across vast distances, with accounts placing him in North Africa, Persia, and even as far as Britain. Wherever he went, he was relentless in sharing the message. When it comes to his death, there are two main traditions. The most widely accepted one says Simon was crucified in Britain around 74 AD. It's a detail recorded in sources like Fox's Book of Martyrs. Another later tradition claims he was killed in Persia, where he was sawed in half. Because of that story, Simon is often depicted holding a large saw in Christian art. Now we come to Matthias, the apostle who joined the group later. He wasn't one of the original 12, but after Judas Iscariot's betrayal and suicide, the remaining apostles chose Matthias to take his place. From that moment on, Matthias fully stepped into the same dangerous calling. After Pentecost, tradition says he preached in Cappadocia and Syrian Antioch, boldly proclaiming the gospel. Eventually, he returned to Jerusalem, where his mission caught the attention of religious authorities. Most historical accounts say Matthias was first stoned and then beheaded with an axe to ensure his death. There is one minor tradition that claims he died peacefully, but the overwhelming view of the early church is that Matthias died as a martyr. And finally, we reach the unexpected ending. John, the brother of James the Greater, often called the beloved disciple, is traditionally remembered as the only apostle who died of natural causes, but that doesn't mean people didn't try to kill him. During the reign of Emperor Domitian, John was arrested and taken to Rome. Tradition says he was thrown into a vat of boiling oil at the Porta Latina. Somehow he came out completely unharmed. The event reportedly stunned onlookers and led many to convert. Since execution didn't work, John was exiled to the island of Patmos. It was there, alone and isolated, that he received the visions recorded in the book of Revelation. Eventually, John was released and returned to Ephesus, where he spent his final years teaching and mentoring the next generation of church leaders. He is believed to have died peacefully sometime after 98 AD. So now I want to hear from you. Which apostle's story affected you the most and why? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story meaningful, please like the video. It really helps more people see it.